This work is a collaborative effort that we undertook at SAN with two art therapists and a group of classroom teachers who tested all of this stuff with their students. And I am excited to share it with you as a moment of slowness and stillness for you. And then also, if we have time at the end, we'll start applying it to classroom practice. I'm going to offer some information at the start, and I'm offering this because you may find that SEL is either challenging and unfamiliar, or alternatively that you haven't found a way to articulate to your administrators, like, what is the value of this? So I want to provide you with some information at the start, and hopefully it's valuable. And then we'll get in the doing. So I just wanted to frame for you part of the reason that we took on the work of social emotional learning with artwork at the Smithsonian American Art Museum was because we had heard about how challenged students were from a mental health perspective, and particularly in the crisis of the pandemic. And when I was putting materials together for this workshop, I had kind of hoped that maybe things were getting a little bit better. And then I found the statistics that you see on the screen that are both fairly recent. And you can see that we've got students who are still suffering from depression, the majority of whom are not getting treatment. And then also, when we start to think about why is it valuable to support students and their mental and emotional well-being, you can see that teachers, district leaders, and school leaders are all saying that supporting mental health helps students learn so that they can grow into being happy, healthy adults. So we know that this is valuable. We know that there is a need for student mental health support. And we also know that it's not teachers' jobs to be a counselor. So I want to just make sure that I am clear. I am under no false impression that anybody can be a teacher, anybody can be a counselor. These are two very different and specific professions. And also, there are certain social emotional learning skills that we can all master and support each other with as we all learn them. So that's kind of the perspective that I'm taking here. The thing that I thought was really neat was that there is this kind of crisis information that's on the screen in front of us. And also, the CDC is saying that one of the reasons that students are feeling this way is because they feel disconnected. And we have tools for connection. So that's the kind of the core goal of the activities that we're going to undertake together today, is recognizing the reality of mental health crisis, recognizing the need for tools and connection, and then practicing those tools in order to support ourselves, and then ultimately, if you so choose, to support your students. So that's kind of like the overarching thesis. And then I realized, oh my gosh, you guys, when we talk about social emotional learning, there are so many different ways of talking about it. There's so many different classifications, et cetera, et cetera. So I just thought what I would offer is that I really like the CASTLE framework. That's what you see on the screen here. And you'll see that there are 5 kind of core skills, and you can unpack these further, but just to keep things succinct, I wanted to emphasize for us that these core skills give us many different ways of connecting with ourselves and one another. And it's kind of the toolkit for how to be in relationship. So self-awareness, like we did at the beginning, we checked in, we realized we have our own internal weather going. We might need some circulation. We might need to take a deep breath, like just kind of keeping that monitoring going of like, how am I and what do I need to do for myself? That moves us into this self-management. So recognizing I'm having an emotion, what do I need to do in order to manage that? And particularly thinking about it within context. So recognizing that the way that I manage myself in one context may not be the way that I can manage myself in another context, whether that's because for me as a very sound sensitive person, for instance, there we go. I know that if I'm going into a really loud space, I'm going to have a really hard time managing my emotional reactions to things. So kind of recognizing in advance. That leads us into responsible decision making. So realizing that we have choices about the way that we behave toward one another and toward ourselves, and recognizing that we can make positive choices even within the constraints of whatever situation we find ourselves. Relationship skills, being able to identify and navigate positive relationships, and then thinking about the ways that we navigate context with one another. And then finally, within those different contexts, recognizing that everybody there is not exactly the same as I am. So this is the idea of connecting across difference. So that's the a lot of information. I'm going to pause so you can reread and refresh. Wow, we have skills for rebuilding. So if we recognize that kids and grown-ups after the pandemic are having a hard time, especially with those relationship skills, those connecting across different skills, we also recognize that there are ways to nurture ourselves and to help our students nurture themselves. So taking small steps. These are actually evidence-supported strategies. Don't avoid social situations. So for fear of messing up, if you just hole yourself up and become isolated even more, you lose the opportunity to stretch those muscles. So going into the social situation, and then so many of these are really just stress management things, but increasing outdoor activities, recognizing that fresh air, gross motor movement, sunshine, all of these things play are very good for us and our mental health. Increase schoolwork activities. Now this one I'm going to have to refresh myself on because I was like, that sounds like a lot. I think what was meant by this was like those activities that help you feel purposeful. School/work activities, increasing friend activities. So similar to not avoiding social situations, finding ways to connect with people that you know are your support system, and then increasing extracurricular activities. So again, back to that idea of play. And I think really what's valuable here is the reminder that this is assuming that you've really shrunk down to zero as far as opportunities to connect and overlap with folks. If you find that you're already maxed out in that regard, not avoiding the social situations, and then also slowing down if you need to, makes good sense to me. So these are the things that we need to do in order to rebuild our connections. And I just want to challenge us really quickly to try to map maybe two things, the top two bullets, taking small steps and going into social situations. What of the 5 SEL competencies would we need? And this is like not a rhetorical question. So let's unpack the idea of taking small steps. What would we need to do? Like what of those 5 tools would we need to use in order to take small steps? Would anybody be willing to share their thought either in the chat or out loud?
Is it possible to reframe the question just one more time in a different way?
I love that. Thank you.
Okay.
So if researchers suggest that in order to rebuild our connection skills, we need to take small steps between self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness, which ones would we have to have? Which tool would we have to have in our toolbox in order to take small steps?
My name is Serena. I work for the American Indian Health Service in Chicago, and I just want to turn my camera on. How are you guys?
Hi, I'm so glad you're
I'm
here.
glad that she asked for you to refrain. That was a mouthful, but I'm a substance counselor here at the American Indian Health Service in Chicago, and I work with clientele, patients all day, and I think the small steps to take is to being present, to acknowledging what they're telling you, kind of reiterate it back to them so that they know that you're listening. Those little small things go a long way. And it makes them open up more, get a little bit more comfortable with you because they do know that you're listening. So yeah, that's something. So thank you, Sarah, for asking her to raise that question.
Really, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
The thing that I'm noticing that connects with your thought is the number of people who are talking about self-awareness. So in order to take a small step, in order to say, like, I'm gonna break this big idea into smaller ideas, I need to kind of know where I'm starting from. What are my priorities? What's important to me? What are my values? And then also knowing that I need to rebuild to some degree. So being able to check in with myself is necessary to even be able to take some small steps. So for you as a counselor, you must be very self-aware in order to say, oh, let's go slow together. Yeah. How about challenging if we need to go into awkward social situations in order to rebuild our connection skills? What are some of the skills we need to be ready to bring with us to go into an awkward social situation? What skills do you need?
Like social awareness and relationship skills.
So talk to me about social awareness skills, though. Like, it's already going to be awkward. Like, tell me more.
Well, if like a student is, in a classroom and already they have a hard time, like either communicating their thoughts or their needs to like peers or students, or they know that there's like another student in the classroom that might trigger them. Being like aware, I guess, like also self-aware and just aware of the fact that they are going to have to find a way to like manage the situation or like remove them away from something that might trigger or like alarm them. So that's kind of what I thought when I thought of social awareness. There's probably a bunch of other ways.
No. And I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things that I heard in there is self-awareness. Like, I know what bothers me when somebody does something, but then also going into a situation and realizing that sometimes just like walking away is going to add to the trouble instead of figuring out how to separate yourself from the issue tactfully. So there's there's the knowing myself, and then also knowing what's kind of expected of me in the environment. And those are challenging things to hold at the same time. Terry is saying in the chat box, self-management. Kathleen is unpacking the idea of social awareness and self-awareness, even though they seem to be sometimes a little bit counterintuitive. Martha's noting the value of small talk and casual conversation, and that some of those skills with small talk and casual conversation that are relationship building are actually also about navigating relationship skills and managing oneself to say, oh, I've been talking a lot, maybe I should stop now, so like that's a really interesting kind of palette that students may not know that they have at their disposal because they don't necessarily have names for those skills. So part of me kind of belaboring this point with you is so that we start to have some names for the skills that we know students need in order to rebuild their connection. So, okay, let's get to the fun stuff. I would like to invite you to just look silently at these 3 works of art. You might use this moment as a mindfulness moment where you're looking and breathing. My opening question to you, after looking at all 3 artworks, is which one to you is the most comforting or familiar? You can either put it in the chat box or share out loud, whichever one works best for you, but which one seems most comforting and familiar? Ooh, A. A is getting some love as the most comforting or familiar. Kathleen counters with a B. Interesting. A, B. Oh my goodness. I'd love to know why. Would anybody be willing to share out loud in the chat box? Why do you say A or why do you say B? It's clear, it's familiar. I love that. It's straightforward. Yeah, it's definitely got the cleanest lines. It's very geometric. It's less abstract, beautiful word. Thank you, Terry. Yeah, okay. B, even though in a dangerous situation, there's comfort with this young child. So interesting. St. Martha's paralleling that as well. Oh, and then there's the idea that maybe we've got this very comfortably sleeping person on the bench. So interesting. We could go back and forth about this, right? So then my invitation to you is would you please, and this may seem kind of like redundant, but please just like humor me for a minute. Which one of these artworks seems least familiar or strangest? Would you put in the chat box which one seems least familiar or strangest and why? Ooh, C is getting a lot of love. C is least familiar or strangest so far. Oh, and B says, or rather Terry says B is strangest. Okay. Why do you vote the way you do? Chris, oh, thank you. C is the most strange because it's out of sync with the other 2. Serena, thank you. I love this idea. So we had mentioned at the start, like, oh, comfortable because it's familiar. You're saying that even though you've seen it before, it is familiar. It is also feels strange. I really appreciate that. Benedict, we have the idea that it's something you don't see every day. Okay. So we are going to exercise going into unfamiliar situations. We're going to exercise our skills at going toward something that seems unfamiliar by spending time with this strange or unfamiliar artwork. So we're going to pause or zoom forward. Preview. Okay. Would you please have your pencil or pen and paper nearby? We are going to use this journaling activity with some opportunities to conference with each other in order to exercise the skills of going toward unfamiliar, of extending ourselves and asking questions. For us as educators, this may be a rather easy practice. So I'll challenge you to consider what it might mean for students to practice this. We're going to begin with something very simple and familiar. The first question is at the top of your paper. Would you please write 5 things you see? And here's where we start stretching into that kind of management of self by stretching into more patience. So write 5 more things, please, that you see. What's interesting or challenging for me anyway about this second look is that it starts to push us into the place of looking beyond what seems so obvious. It starts inviting us to look for details. And when we start to apply this to relationship building, it also gives us that capacity for editing our thinking about a person. So we're going to move into the thinking part. Rather than asking you to tell a whole story about these people, which often happens with the think portion of See, Think, Wonder, my invitation to you is to ask yourself, how do you think the people in this scene feel? What emotions do you think that they are experiencing? And what do you see that makes you say that? So will you jot that down on your paper? So practicing recognizing the emotions of others is a valuable skill. And it's also valuable to realize the limits of our empathy. I just read a great book called Thinking 101, which takes apart a lot of the logical fallacies and the biases that we lean upon as humans. And one of the things that was pointed out is that you can never really know how somebody is thinking or what somebody is feeling unless you ask them. So let's move into that place of wonder. Would you please write on your paper 3 questions you would ask to check your understanding of the scene or to check your thinking about the scene? What 3 questions would you ask? And then, just as we did before with writing down new things you see, would you please write down 3 more questions? What are 3 other questions you would ask? Katerina, I'm so glad to know that. So the longer you observe the painting, the more you see the complexity. Isn't that what we hope people will do for us? Let us to be more than our simple stories. So I have a wonder for you. We're going to step aside from the activity just for a moment, and I'm going to ask you to think about what makes asking questions hard. Like, we all just saw the challenge of asking a far too complex question, what I just did to poor Sarah. So what makes asking questions hard? Either in the chat or out loud, what makes asking questions hard?
You don't want to seem like you're lost or not on the same page as other people.
Yep, for real. Yes. A fear of embarrassment, not sure what the responses are going to be, a fear of rejection, a fear of seeming stupid or saying something offensive. Questions, asking questions can be so scary. Practicing asking questions to artworks gives us a way to figure out the way to do it that we're most comfortable with, and to practice also receiving unexpected responses. So I love that, Terry. You have the idea of you've added threats to our own security. I really appreciate that. Oh yeah, and Angel's thinking about asking questions in another language, right? Language is so complex. So let's practice then refining our questions. One of the things that students often need to have called to their attention is the distinction between an open-ended question and a closed-ended question, and the kind of result that comes from those questions. Do you like ice cream? Yes. Do you like dogs? No. It's you get information, but as far as a relationship building skill goes, Open-ended questions make more space. So on your list of questions, would you please circle all of your open-ended ones? The open-ended questions are the ones that invite people to go on a little bit longer. They're hard to answer with a single word. They're often why and how questions. Would you please circle on your paper your open-ended questions? And then once you've done that, if you have any questions that you haven't circled, if you have any closed-ended questions, the ones often that ask, do you, or what, try rewriting them as open-ended questions. So for instance, do you like ice cream might become, what was your favorite flavor ice cream growing up and why? And when you have an open-ended question that you like, and I'm leaving that purposefully wide open, will you please add that question to the chat? Some open-ended question that you feel is like compelling, exciting, that makes you curious, that you're proud that you came up with, or that you just think would provoke interesting conversation. Will you please add that open-ended question to the chat? Why are two of the girls looking out to their left? Chris is seconding your question. Bye, Sue. Thanks for being here. Oh, Benedict is wondering, why do they not have to seem to have the same feeling? Thank you for asking that question. Yeah, I noticed, for instance, the woman in the middle, her face almost looks more smiling to me than the women, particularly the woman on the leftmost side. That's really interesting. Thank you. What other open-ended questions do you have? How did you end up on the trapeze? What does the feet hanging loose on the bar tell you? Oh, right. So is that like a confidence thing? Is that something else? Yeah. Beautiful. Now I wonder if you will put into the chat box, please, one question that you would ask these women in order to better understand how they feel. What would you ask them? Or what would you ask them to better understand the scene? Oh, which acrobat do you identify as confident and ready? Are you part of a larger act? What question would you ask these women? Are you on a break from a rehearsal? What are the safety measures? Love that. So as you look at your list of questions and the list of questions that's growing in the chat, Kathleen, how much are you paid? Indeed, these women are part of the 1930s circus during the Great Depression. They were part of a traveling circus. And one of the things that I was fascinated to learn about trapeze artists, particularly during this time, is that they broke a lot of gender norms. So these women were strong, they were fearless, they lived basically independently, they traveled around the country, all of these different things. So these women are presented to us in a way that tells one story, but society might have understood them differently. So I wonder, if you were in their shoes for just a moment, which of the questions that we've brainstormed together so far would be easiest to answer? Would somebody be willing to unmute and say which question is probably the easiest one for them to answer?
Probably the one about what are the safety measures or what's the level of experience of each gymnast. But probably if you ask, like I had a question that said, what brought you here or what's your story, that might be hard to answer depending on how much people want to share.
Right. So this is back to that idea of what makes social situations awkward and uncomfortable is the reality that sometimes you might be asking a question that seems so simple, and in fact it's quite complex. So the what are the safety features of your circus is like, oh, it's about somebody else. I just give you a little bit of a report and then we're done answering that question. Whereas some other questions might be harder to answer. So I wonder if you as an individual would please look at all of these questions and for yourself identify which question that's been posed either in the chat or on your paper would be the hardest one for you to answer. And this is just for yourself. And then this last question, I'd like to open up a little bit for discussion. Of all the questions that we've got either in the chat box or on your piece of paper, which question do you think it would be scariest for most people to answer? And if you'd either share that out loud or in the chat box, I'd appreciate that. Which question do you think would be scariest for most people to answer?
I feel like maybe I would have a hard time answering are you in the 1930s Great Depression circus and how much are you paid? Because I feel like that's a very specific question and you would have to know about that time period.
Yeah.
And that's like, if you don't know the fact, then you don't like know if you don't know about that, you don't know how to answer it properly. So
Yeah, totally. Right. So like back to that fear of looking stupid or uninformed, like that pricks right into that fear. Any other questions that might be scary to answer for most people? Do you have life insurance? Right? We would want to know. We would want to know that they're covered and that the people they love would be taken care of. But that such a question opens financial issues. It opens mortality questions. I mean, that's a big question right there for sure. So part of what we uncovered with this activity is that when students get into this, when they have conversations about questions, you get to know how comfortable are they with asking questions? What is their facility with that? But then also it gave students an opportunity to unpack which questions feel safe for them and which questions feel scary, realizing that sometimes some people's safe questions are other people's scary questions. And I wonder if you would be willing to think about your students or the learners that you work with, whether that's in school or in a treatment facility or whatever, when you're thinking about that distinction between safe and scary, what do you need to know about your students, your learners, in order to know which is a safe or scary question? So what do you need to know about your conversational partner in order to know whether something is a safe or scary question?
maybe like the body language or facial expressions that students give after you ask the question.
Yeah, so you would need to learn how to read body language. Like if you see somebody do this, that is a cue that like they feel uncomfortable with the question you asked. What do you need to know about your conversational partner in order to understand what makes one question safe or scary? Oh, Benedict, you have to choose the right moment to ask, right? So now we're starting to think about the give and take, the pattern, the dance of a conversation. No information about their background, right? That's so interesting. So Angels, you had mentioned earlier in the chat, for instance, who has the most experience on the trapeze? One of them may have lied to get the job. If you know that that person's like job security or job status is tricky, asking such a question might be really like an unsafe question, whereas for other people it's just like, oh yeah, like I have all the skills I need, right? Benedict is adding that it has to be the right place too. So recognizing that sometimes that there's this right place, right time for a question. Students may not know that. They may not have those skills built in. And so they might be triggering each other by mistake, just trying to ask a good question. So then I wonder if you will entertain with me a how else and why. So if let's say that Kathleen, because I think your question was such a good one. Do you have life insurance? Let's say that that is a question that we're going to ask these people. How else might we ask that question? How might we edit that question in order to better understand these people and negotiate some of those relationship skills? How else might we ask that question? And if you'll answer in the chat box or out loud. Ooh, are you taking measures to protect yourself at your job? Oh, what a tender question. You're mastering a dangerous job. How do you and your family feel about that? How are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10 today? What a beautiful warm up, right? You're trying to figure out where are we together in this moment? How are you? What can you provide for me to make me feel safe? Man, these questions all of a sudden have become expansive. They've become responsive rather than reactive. How do you overcome your anxieties about safety issues with your job? I want to know you better. That's really interesting. So as we start to edit these questions, we start to unlock some of the possibilities of questions. What we might do in a different activity is try to take on the perspective of each of these 3 women and perhaps like practice answering those questions or any number of different things, but I want to keep things moving. One of the things that I learned, which was really valuable to me and part of the mentorship of having art therapists as consultants, was realizing that when we ask students or learners or ourselves to take on somebody else's perspective, we also need to give some students, particularly students with more complex traumas and that sort of thing, a way back. So how do they get back into their bodies once we've invited them essentially to leave their bodies? So these de-rolling strategies are also strategies that help us regulate our emotions. So just naming them, checking in with yourself, right? Like, let's come back to ourselves as learners. You know, I just asked you a bunch of complex questions. There wasn't a lot of interaction. So like, check back in. How are you feeling right now? And then for yourself, name that feeling. Are you feeling low energy? Are you feeling frustrated? Are you feeling contemplative? What feeling are you feeling? And then take a breath. Breathing deeply into your stomach, breathing, maybe you breathe in 3 and you hold at the top and then you blow out. And then you scan your situation. So this gets us into that place of realizing that some actions are more or less acceptable in different social contexts. So what is your social context? Are you safe right now? Hopefully the answer is yes, you feel safe right now. And then based on the expectations of the space around you, choose a strategy, a next step strategy to address what you need. So maybe it is breathing again. Maybe it is using your senses, so reactivating, reminding your body that you are here right now. Maybe you're tensing and releasing, so maybe you're actually gripping your hands tight and then letting them go. Maybe you're raising your shoulders and then letting them fall. Maybe you're taking a break. So this is when we give students, who have gotten activated, the opportunity to say, like, I need 5 minutes. Or if you're in the middle of a marital conflict or a partner conflict, you just say, I love you. I'm going to be back in 10 minutes. I want to finish this. I just need to get myself back together. Looking for one thing. This is where, so we're moving from simple to more complex. Looking for one thing is like looking for, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling some negative emotion kind of out of control. Okay, that can all be true at the same time as I also have my strengths. So I'm going to look for one strength of mine or one thing that went well today. So encouraging learners to enter into a place of it can be true that bad things are happening, and also there might still be something good happening around us or inside us. And then the yes, but is such a funny one, because I love the improv idea of yes, but yes, but is an acknowledgement that yes, I failed that test. I don't feel good about it, but I have an opportunity to take another one next week, but now I know how I need to study. So acknowledging that the crummy thing happened, or that the bad feeling is right now, and then also looking for the next step. So rather than tangling with the emotions, so this connects with cognitive behavioral therapy. So rather than tangling with the emotion, kind of sitting next to it. So these are ways for us to empower students to regulate their emotions. So now we're going to take just 10 minutes to connect with the idea of nurturing relationships. So after having identified the ways that we can enter into relationship or initiate relationship with others through question asking, through slowing down our judgments and that sort of thing, my invitation to you is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. No, I can't do that. How am I going to do this? Elizabeth, you created something so complex. Okay, here's how we're going to do it. Would you please open a new window and find one of the artworks that speaks to you in the set that you'll find at tinyurl.com/SEL NOV 2022. And I'm putting it in the chat too. Go there, please. And choose an artwork that reminds you of a community where you belong, where you feel safe and welcome. If you have any trouble getting there, give me a shout and we'll work on it together. When you have found this artwork where you feel safe and welcome, you're going to take these 4 steps. I'm going to save them and then I'm going to put them in the chat box. What is it that you see in this artwork that makes it feel safe or welcoming for you? Draw that on your paper. After you've done that, imagine walking into the artwork. What might you hear or smell? So this is asking you to activate the part of you that reminds you of what makes me feel safe and welcome. Draw or write in answer to that. Next, how might you change the artwork to make it even more welcoming? So imagine that you can make this scene even more welcoming for you. What would you change? You're going to draw or write. And then finally, who might you add to the artwork to make it more welcoming or safe? So I'm going to play a little bit of music just so that it's like an audio timer, but I'm also going to put those notes in the chat. If you have any issue, let me know. We're going to spend, let's say, 6 minutes doing this. The reflection question that I'm going to begin us with is one that might be more challenging for students than it is for adults. So I just want to acknowledge that. But I'd like to ask you to look at the changes that you made to the artwork. So this was the artwork that you identified as the one that made you remember a community where you feel safe, where people welcome you, where you feel belonging. And then you continued to sculpt or tweak it to make it even more belonging, even more welcoming, even more safe. So what do those changes tell you about you? Will you just write down 2 sentences? What do the changes that you made to the artwork tell you about you? And then I'll ask you to add on to that. What do the changes to the artwork tell you about the people who nurture you? And then finally, this last question on the bottom of the screen that I can see, what do you need in order to feel safe and strong? How might you get more of this support? Will you please write a little about that just for you? If anyone is willing to share a thought, I'm happy to hear what you discovered, but feel no pressure. I wonder what you think your learners would gain by being able to answer such questions for themselves. What would your learners gain by being able to answer these kinds of questions for themselves?
I think they get to learn more about themselves and where they come from. I mean, this makes me think about, we did the Where I'm From poem, and some of the students, after we completed the whole unit about identity and they wrote their poems, they said that it had helped them realize how important their culture was, and they had seen, or they had realized of things that they hadn't really paid that much attention to, like their ancestors or their culture. Yeah. So,
That's beautiful.
yeah.
Thank you. Benedict is saying the same. She's giving you +1. Yeah, so you bet, like, those students get to better know themselves. They feel a connection. They feel, like they have maybe more roots. And then Kathleen is adding on that they might be able to better advocate for themselves. They might be able to identify that certain needs are not being met, and then they can figure out perhaps actions to take to rectify that. It's amazing. So then the question becomes, what do you as teachers gain by being able to answer such questions? Thank you for adding that. So by being able to reflect on these kind of questions, students may also be able to recognize things that they have in common and create more community. That's wonderful. So thinking about being safe, feeling held and healthy as a tool for creating connection to student in a welcoming school community, but then also helping them feel better prepared as learners too. I would offer that being able to answer such questions as these, for me as an educator, is also about being able to identify when or what to ask for, I should say, when I need to be filled up in order to do a better job of being an educator. No, that's really wonderful. So also, Kathleen, you're adding that there are financial and geographic concerns that make it hard for students and teachers to be able to just change the situation that they're in. So thank you for identifying that. I appreciate it. So for you teachers, and I know that this is a time in human history when being a teacher is particularly challenging, knowing what you need is really, really valuable. So knowing when you feel safe and who makes you feel safe is really, really valuable. And recognizing that I'll borrow an idea from a blogger that I really like named Jen Gonzalez. She says, some people are your marigolds And your marigolds are those people who make you feel lifted up. A marigold is a companion plant. It's one that helps the plants it grows beside. And so knowing who your marigolds are, by being able to identify what makes a relationship feel nurturing for you, is a way for you to be able to continue to extend yourself. So recognizing that we are building relationship skills and then practicing them by putting them into practice. So I want to, knowing that we are all feeling perhaps the weight of the falling darkness if you're on the East Coast, just show you that we have hopefully practiced a lot of the skills that we talked about at the top. We've had opportunities to check ourselves, check back in with ourselves, become perhaps more self-aware, self-management. I hope we've practiced in recognizing what you need in the moment. Responsible decision-making is probably a little bit challenging in this particular format, but I'll offer that when we pair it together with relationship skills, the revision of our questions and the consideration of audience is a really valuable way of practicing those things, and then also applying our social awareness skills. So I'm going to skip the next bit and just offer that this entire activity is available on our website for free, along with a bunch of artworks. This is available in English and Spanish. And we want you to print it out. We want you to share it. If you want to shoot me an email with your physical address, I can actually ship you a couple, and they're really, really beautiful. And then if you need more social emotional learning resources, including conversations amongst teachers about the challenges and opportunities of sewing SEL into other content areas, this Ed Week link is a really valuable one. So I'm going to leave this up for a minute while I turn off the recording.